13 civilians were killed on Friday in an Israeli airstrike on a house in the Nusayrat refugee camp and the Tufa neighborhood in the Gaza Strip. Colombian President Gustavo Petro met with the indigenous Minga to discuss issues related to the defense of life, the autonomy of the peoples, and to reject the resurgence of the armed conflict and violence in the communities. And Russia's Central Election Commission reported on Friday that the first day of the presidential elections closed with a 36.12% voter turnout by 10 p.m. local time in Moscow. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Thirteen civilians were killed on Friday in an Israeli airstrike on a house in the Nusayrat refugee camp and the Tufa neighborhood in the Gaza Strip. Local sources said that Israeli warplanes shelled several houses in the Nusayrat refugee camp in the central strip, killing 7 civilians and injuring several others. 5 civilians were also killed and dozens of civilians, mostly children, were wounded in a strike on a house in the Tufa neighborhood northeast of Gaza City. A civilian was also killed and several others were injured by the occupation shelling of a house belonging to the Abu Dawabe family in the village of Al-Masdar in the central Gaza Strip. Australia says it will restore funding to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees UNRWA weeks after it lost millions of dollars in international support following allegations of Israel that some of its staff in the Gaza Strip were involved in the October 7th Hamas-led attacks. The announcement was made by Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong, who refuted Israel's accusations that 450 members of the agency's staff had participated in the attacks in southern Israel that sparked the current war, as well as reinstating $6 million in stalled funding for UNRWA. Australia has pledged an additional $2.6 million to UNICEF to provide urgent services in Gaza. Australia's decision follows similar moves by Canada, Sweden, and the European Union. Authorities report over 100 casualties and 200 injured after an Israeli airstrike targeted a gathering of starved Palestinians waiting for humanitarian aid packages at the Kuwait roundabout in southern Gaza. Civil defense spokesperson Mahmoud Basal revealed that Israeli warplanes initially opened live fire at Palestinians waiting for aid, then the occupation's artillery shelled the roundabout, committing the massacre. The casualties were transported to 4 different hospitals in Gaza City and northern Gaza. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health in Gaza said rescue missions to pull out individuals from underneath the rubble are still ongoing, despite the difficulties and dangers of the field. In Palestine, human rights organizations reiterate their call to meet humanitarian needs in the Gaza Strip, combined with an immediate and permanent ceasefire to ensure full and safe access to aid. This is how Gazans face a crisis-level hunger at the highest rate ever recorded by the Integrated Food Security Phase classification. But health authorities pointed out that at least 20 children have died recently from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and related illness. In turn, the Israeli regime continues to prevent humanitarian access while aid airdrops are taking place over the area. This aid does not meet the demand of the 2.3 million people who face a catastrophic situation of survival. On the first day of Ramadan, Israeli occupation forces prevented thousands of worshippers from reaching the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The occupation forces were deployed extensively around the checkpoints of Kaladija to the north of Jerusalem, Saitona to the east, and Bethlehem to the south. The agents turned back thousands of worshippers and did not allow them to reach Al-Aqsa Mosque under the pretext of not obtaining the necessary permits. They also prevented all the medical teams of the Jerusalem institutions from entering the mosque and attacked several of them. In Palestine, a new ceasefire proposal was presented by Hamas, according to the organization spokesperson. The proposal is based upon what they consider essential for any agreement, so let's see the main requests. The proposal has a first-time period of 45 days based on a prisoner swap. The initial release of Israelis would include women, children, elderly, and ill captives in return of 1,500 Palestinian prisoners, with Hamas to nominate 500 of them who are sentenced to long or life sentences. All detainees from both sides would be released in a second stage under Hamas' plan. The project also includes a temporary halt to military operations, end of aerial exploration, and the reposition of Israeli forces far outside populated areas in the entire Gaza Strip. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Mexico, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, during his governmental morning press conference, evaluated and praised the improvements of the Mexicali city in matters of economy, security, and social guarantees. At the press conference were present Marina del Pilar Ávila, Baja California Governor, and Luis Crescencio Sandoval, National Defense Secretary, among other attendants. The head of state also encouraged the tribute to the national historical memory and to the extensive culture of the country. One of the main subjects of the statements was the role of the family as a protective factor against drug addictions. President Obrador also showed his concern about the fentanyl consumption in the U.S.
Think about how American brothers and sisters are suffering because of drug use, which is a pandemic. The use of fentanyl, which unfortunately leads to the loss of 100 young people every year, and among other factors. We believe that it has to do with the fact that young people have to leave their families at an early age, something that does not happen in our country.
The government of Venezuela denounces the complicity of the Argentine justice system with the United States in the theft of a plane owned by the Venezuelan company TeleSUR. The Vice President Delcy Rodriguez pointed out that Argentine officials delivered the aircraft to the U.S. Department of Justice to later destroy it. She indicated that these actions are in addition to the more than 930 illegal sanctions imposed by the extreme right wing against the Venezuelan state and people. In response, the government of Venezuela prohibited the overflight of its airspace by any aircraft coming from or bound for Argentina, in full exercise of the international principle of proportionality. Colombian President Gustavo Petro met with the indigenous Minga to discuss issues related to the defense of life, the autonomy of the peoples, and to reject the resurgence of the armed conflict and violence in the communities. During the meeting in Cali, the Colombian head of state pointed out that more than 340,000 Colombians have died from lack of hospital assistance, a higher number than those who died because of the armed violence. He also reiterated his government's respect for justice, Congress, and the popular vote. In this sense, President Petro urged Colombians to place themselves in the front line of the country's change, which is peace.
I invite the people of Colombia to put themselves in the front line because it's time to move on. The first line of change is peace. The first line of change is democracy. The first line of change is women, black men and women, the indigenous people, the youth. The first line of change If it is the people, Colombia changes. That is the path that I propose here in the face of your discussions and your proposals.
Events all over Brazil and in other cities around the world commemorated this March 14th the 6th anniversary of the assassination of Councilwoman Marielle Franco and her driver Anderson Gomez. The crime was committed in Rio de Janeiro in 2018, and so far the Brazilian state does not answer who had them killed and why. Let's see more details in the following report by our correspondent Andres Vieira and Sebastián Soto. Andres.
And family members clamored for justice. 6 years ago, paramilitary gunfire took the lives of Marielle Franco and her driver Anderson Gomez. The black, bisexual, and human rights defender councilwoman was the victim of a political crime.
We cannot deny the pain and death, the structural systemic historical abuse against black people.
4 accused of planning and executing the crime are in custody, and 5 other suspects were killed over the last 5 years. This Thursday, the local media reported that the investigations reached the Supreme Court, since an investigated person was identified who can only be judged by the highest court of the country, legal right of deputies, senators, and the national executive.
It is unacceptable that our family and Anderson's family still have no answer as to who ordered her death. It is unacceptable that the perpetrators, those accused of the execution, are still not in popular justice. But we will reiterate that our family will continue to fight for justice, and we will be the continuation of her dream, and we will be resistant for her. Political violence in this country needs to end. It doesn't matter what your political position is. It doesn't matter who you vote for. We can no longer allow, under any hypothesis, is that we do not dialogue in favor of democracy.
The March for Justice for Marielle and Anderson was also joined by those who lost family members killed by the Rio de Janeiro police.
And we are in a new year without Marielle. She was with me the day of my son's death. She held my hand. She was with me all the time. So that's why I'm here today, to ask for justice for Marielle and Anderson.
The mourning turned into a struggle in the firm steps of these people. If the shots were to silence her voice and what she represented, Marielle Franco's legacy lives on and multiplies.
When we have a justification for the crime, it is not that the pain will be solved, but we will know that the state is looking at us, that the state is looking at Marielle's family, that the state is looking at the human rights defenders. Now we have a feeling of impotence. We have been asking the same question for 6 years. Who ordered to kill Marielle? And we have no answers.
The day ended with the Justice for Marielle and Anderson Festival in the territory of Little Africa in Rio de Janeiro.
André Vieira e Sebastián Soto, teleSUR, Brasil.
At least 52 people reported dead and 5 missing in Bolivia due to heavy rains, while the red alert remains in effect due to the danger of flooding. The Meteorological Monitoring Service assured that precipitations will continue until March 23rd, so it is necessary to maintain preventive measures. The Bolivian Minister of Defense, Edmundo Novillo, regretted the damage caused by the Rio Grande near Montero Hoyos in the department of Santa Cruz. For his part, the head of state, Luis Arce, gave instructions to undertake a reconstruction and rehabilitation plan for the areas affected by disasters in La Paz and the rest of the country. The Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador warned that the country is going through a strong heat wave that will continue for several days. The authorities indicated that they continue to monitor the heat wave, so they assessed that there is a possibility that there will be a deficit of rain and high temperatures. Likewise, the entity recommended citizens to take measures to protect themselves from the sun, heat and dehydration. Meanwhile, it is expected that the drought will decrease between June and August, and the cold event, La Niña, will arrive with cold temperatures and humidity. We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Russia's Central Election Commission reported on Friday that the first day of the presidential elections closed with a 36.12% voter turnout by 10:30 p.m. local time. The Commission also informed about the voters' turnout by the end of the day in the new territories of the Russian Federation, with the Popular Republic of Donetsk and Kherson province with 69.28 and 68.66% respectively, and the provinces of Zaporizhia and Lugansk with 56 and 36%. Russia's presidential elections are held this year during 3 days, from March 15th to 17th. Citizens over the age of 18 can elect the head of state by going to a polling station in person or by electronic voting via the internet. On Friday, Ella Pamfilova, chairwoman of the Russian Central Election Commission, noted that from February 25th to March 14th, more than 2.3 million people voted early in the presidential elections. In this connection, it is good to note that the 2024 elections included the regions of Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, Zaporizhia and Kherson. On the other hand, the Electoral Authority noted that in addition to more than 94,000 polling stations in Russia, 295 polling stations will be opened abroad in 144 countries. In this sense, 4 candidates are running for president, including current leader Vladimir Putin, who is running as an independent and also is the favorite in the polls. In this context of the presidential elections in Russia, the president of the Central Election Commission, Ella Pamfilova, said that Russian specialists can defend the election system against cyber attacks.
This morning we had a cyber attack on the video observation system in Tumen. It was a professional attack and those were hackers who tried to hinder the process. But we are prepared. Our specialists are sure that we will be able to defend our electoral system.
President Vladimir Putin said Friday that a string of Ukrainian attacks carried out as presidential polls were opening in Russia represented a bid to disrupt the voting process.
The purpose of these military, senseless and criminal actions from a humanitarian point of view, as has already been said, is an attempt to disrupt the Russian presidential elections. I'm sure that our people, the people of Russia, will respond to this with even greater unity. Who have they decided to intimidate? The Russian people? The multinational people of Russia? This has never happened, and I'm sure it will never happen.
Leading Senegalese opposition figure Ousmane Sonko predicted Friday a comfortable first-round win for his coalition presidential candidate in his first public appearance a day after being freed from prison. Sonko was greeted by hundreds of supporters outside a hotel in the capital Dakar, where he held a news conference with his deputy and presidential hopeful Bassirou Diomaye Faye, also released from prison late Thursday. Disqualified from running in this vote, 49-year-old Sonko has been at the center of a more than 2 years standoff with the state. Sonko named Faye to replace him on the presidential ballot, a decision he ratified during his Friday's news conference. Faye has promised to reclaim Senegal's sovereignty and renegotiate oil and gas contracts as well as defense agreements if elected. We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.